Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure, all through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, your producer and co-host. So happy to have you here, folks. Got a great guest for you today. Hey, don't forget about Ian's brand new book, The Fix. Head on over to wherever books are sold, wherever you prefer to get your books, and make sure you grab it. Side note here, he did something really cool in this book, The Fix, which is basically around the 12 steps. And he did something similar to what he did in the book, The Road Back to You. Before The Road Back to You, all of the sort of Enneagram books and information, it was basically like reading a textbook. But Ian made the Enneagram really accessible through his writing style, through story, and through his personal experience. He's done something really similar with his brand new book, The Fix, around the 12 steps, and basically says we all have addictions, regardless of what they are. Our addictions don't put us in rehab centers, and they're not as obvious as the alcohol and drugs, but we all have our little addictions, even if we don't have big ones. So it's a great read for anyone, and I know you're going to enjoy the book. Make sure you go and check it out wherever fine books are sold, because it is a fine book for you to read. Listen, our guest, Josh Nadeau, he has a brand new book himself, and it is called Room for Good Things to Run Wild. Josh has his undergrad in physics, master's in theological studies, and he said his art and writing are invitations to reimagine the holy ordinary of everyday life under the beauty of Jesus. And we all need more of the beauty of Jesus. So anything that'll unpack that for me and for you has got to be a good thing. So make sure you check that one out too. Room for Good Things to Run Wild. Josh Nadeau, he is an Enneagram 7. He's with us today. So happy you're with us too. That's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now, without any further ado, here is the host of the show, Ian Crum.
Hey, Typology Tribe, Ian Morgan Cron here. Yes, welcome back to the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure through the lens of the Enneagram. Today, we've got a great guest on the show. Please welcome Josh Nadeau, Enneagram 7 and author of the new book, Room for Good Things to Run Wild, How Ordinary People Become Everyday Saints. Josh, welcome.
Thank you guys so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so pumped.
So this is how we know we have an Enneagram 7 on the show. We actually were supposed to start recording 30 minutes ago, but we have spent pretty much the last half hour talking about early childhood misadventures with pot, with trying to figure out how to really say Josh's last name, because I came in with Nadeau. Anthony came in with Nadeau, and then Josh, who supposedly has the name, says Josh Nadeau because he hails from Canada and he has a French influence.
Yes.
And
which I'm ashamed to say to a bunch of Americans. I'll say that, coming from the Great White North, admitting that I have French heritage is just T-ball number one to get made fun of. Here's a soft underhand throw. Please make fun of me.
Even the funnier thing is that my publicist wrote in that, or someone's publicist wrote in, could have been Josh's, that he was an Enneagram 8. So I'm thinking, okay, Enneagram 8, and we were talking for half an hour, and Josh has this kind of wonderful smiling, and he's got a little bit of pressured speech. And he's joking and he's curious. And I'm sitting here, Anthony's sitting here, and I'm going, this guy does not smell like an 8. And so when I said Enneagram 8 earlier, you're like, no. I am 7 through and through. Okay, so talk to me about being an Enneagram 7. How'd you learn about it? And tell me about what is life like inside an Enneagram 7 head?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I found out, like, the Enneagram got really popular a few years ago, and my wife wanted to figure out.
So I've heard.
Yeah. You guys are the forerunners of this. You're asking me what it's like to exude tons of charisma, and it went well for me in life. And so I did the Enneagram thing, and I had this moment. The only other personality type thing I did before was Myers-Briggs. That got popular through a season when I was in uni, and did the Enneagram, and I was joking with my wife, being like, I'm such a mystery. No one's ever going to figure me out. read all about it, and I was like, oh, okay, they got me down to a T. So being an Enneagram 7, I mean, it has its pros, it has its perks. I love people, get on with people. My wife and I have done a ton of traveling, tons of exploration. We couch surf through Europe. We backpack through Europe. We had a blast. I mean, the cons are trying to be an artist and a disciplined artist. Being an Enneagram 7 means anytime there's any issue that isn't just creative, but like I did my taxes for 2022 last week. Just because I'm such a 7, be like, oh man, this is a little bit of a pain. Yeah, we'll put that off till later.
What is your wife?
She's a 4-wing 3.
Do you know what kind of 4 she is? Is she a sexual 4 or a social
that's quite
4?
Personal.
Oh man.
I wish y'all could have seen the look on Josh's face before he said that.
Yeah. So
Josh Nadau's face just went absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry, Nadeau. Excuse me,
ghostly
Nadeau.
pale. Yeah, I blushed.
I perked up.
Yeah, I perked up. I do miss my wife. She's pregnant with our second right now. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So there's definitely, I don't know exactly where she would land. I'm trying to map out our relationship.
All right, but hold on a second. Let me just say why. There's 3 different 4s.
Okay.
And one is the kind that is stereotypically described. That's the social 4. Mm-hmm. And social 4 tends to, that's the one that you typically hear described, right? But there's 2 other variants. And the 3 variants of 4 are insanely different. Huh. So, and the same is true of 6s. So they actually look like their own numbers. That's why I asked.
That's very
no matter.
No. I would be now I'm going to go read about it after and
can you just
text my wife
really quickly?
Describe her really quickly.
So she's an artist through and through. Mm-hmm. Very social, loves people, goes very deep with people. She's beautiful. She's one of the kinds of 4s that is, she feels that pressure of being in but not of, and how she looks at life. And so she has this understanding. She grasps this core identity and feels a bit of the tension of some people can't see me, but the people who do see me really resonate. And there's like a very tight cohesion. I'm trying to think of other things that would help.
Is she melancholy?
Sometimes.
Okay.
But it's very difficult because like when she's down, but when she's up, like she's a spitfire. She's electric.
Interesting.
So she's not like given to episodes of melancholy, like, Victorian England. Oh no, I've fallen into an episode of melancholy. But there's every once in a while, she'll feel that disconnect of the world where her view and her identity and her outlook and perspective. There's that Lewis quote, like what you see and hear and understand depends on the kind of person you are. And so who she is and how she sees the world every once in a while will just hit her. And she'll say to me, she said it before I left. She's like, I'm feeling just a bit off because I don't think there's any around who looks at the world the way I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it could be the classic social.
Yeah, maybe. The reason I ask is because the self-preservation 4 actually often looks like a 3 or a 7. And the 1-to-1 or the sexual 4, sometimes called, often looks like an 8.
Yeah, so she wouldn't be an 8.
That's how different those 3 4s are.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And the 1-to-1 4 is much more aggressive. The social is much more inwardly gazing. Mm-hmm. And the self-preservation 4 is oftentimes called the sunny 4 because they have a sunny, almost 7-ish, 3-ish like exterior self-presentation. So anyway, that's why I asked. Okay, so back to you. Back inside your Enneagram 7 head.
Yep.
If I were to get up inside your head on a typical day, what kinds of thoughts and feelings would I encounter?
So I'm very glad you asked. I've gone on this journey. So when I first started dating my wife, I was completely emotionally disconnected from my thoughts. I was like the stereotypical guy who, hey, Josh, how you feeling? Happy or hungry? And then eventually, if I go hungry long enough, I'm very angry. And so we printed out when we were first dating like an emotions chart. I had like this childish, here's all the happy faces. And I had to start processing. It was like to feel my own feelings. And I know that's a classic 7 thing, just avoidance of tough feelings. And so being married to a 4, has been phenomenal. And exploring those things, most of the stuff that's going on in my head is just excitement. So dated, I'm super optimistic, very excited about the things going on in my life. And life right now is going very well. So there's tons to be excited about in the sense of the book is out. I'm doing lots of work in and around art and beauty and cultivating Christian imagination. And so there's always these gears turning, and I'm always thinking of the best way life could be.
You just used the phrase Christian imagination, which is something I've done quite a bit of time thinking about. And chances are you've read Jeremy Begbie, and you've read some of his acolytes, people who have graduated from his program at Duke and at Cambridge. We've never had Jeremy on the show, Anthony, which we need to do.
Royalties for that for me?
Yeah, royalties for you. Yeah, we'll get you a fine fee. But I actually know Jeremy, and he's a really good guy, and he would be a fascinating conversation. We'll circle back to Christian imagination in a minute. It's interesting. People think in stereotypes generally, not types. But we think about artists as being more introverted, more self-reflective than sevens often are, that they are very in touch with their feelings. In fact, what we think about are fours, right? When we think about artists, we think of fours. We don't think of sevens per se, at least not in the visual arts especially. Tell me about your identity as a seven and an artist. Yeah,
the identity, like being a seven and an artist at first, so there's like this sweet spot that I found. I realized I'm a lover of literature. So reading Dostoevsky, reading Hemingway, reading Steinbeck, reading all the greats I could possibly get my hands on, and falling in love with their ability to articulate all of these ideas in life that I was obsessed with. And then going and reading about their lives and thinking to myself, there's parts of their living that's amazing. Hemingway running with the bulls, boxing, traveling the world. And then Hemingway had this curse of, hey, I feel so disconnected from life, like aimed a shotgun up into the blue, put his face between and ended it. And so I remember having this thought thinking like, all of my greatest artistic heroes who are writing literature have this super tormented, morose, melancholy outlook on life. And here's me, which is just, I'm bursting at the seams. Life is a gift. Everything is beautiful. If you take the time to taste and see, for example, that the Lord is good, you find this goodness, truth, and beauty. And so I struggled finding this identity where there are parts of me. So in the book, the way that it opens is me being depressed. I was an alcoholic. I was depressed. I wanted to not be alive. And I started having these thoughts thinking, if everything I believe is true, why am I going to the bottom of a bottle to find solace? And so I had this disconnect with my identity, with the arts, with my faith, and I couldn't seem to put it together. And so I felt torn to shreds as a human, like so disconnected and disembodied from who I was. And so part of the journey was learning to integrate who God has made me to be, being a seven, with all the harsh realities of life, because even if you're a seven, you get depressed, and I had to go to therapy and do all the stuff. And then being a Christian, learning to find the depth and richness of Christ in such a way that it meets the every person, not just like a caricature of who a Christian ought to be, not just like you said, a stereotype of a Christian, but like a real seven, a real four, a real six. And that was a difficult and complex journey because I'm also the kind of person who won't tell a lie. I cannot live with internal incongruity in my own life. If something isn't consistent, it tears me up. And so I would rather have mystery that is consistent than a bunch of platitudes and catchphrases that sound good, but just gaslight you and talk right past you.
So when you said you were an alcoholic, do you mean you were an alcoholic or do you mean you were just a real hard drinker?
So it wasn't diagnosed alcoholism, but I would drink a bottle of bourbon every 2 days. I would drink before I went to work at 5 a.m. I would have a couple pints on break at lunch. I would have a pint of beer before I got home. And then my wife and I would go out and I'd be drinking. I didn't know. I didn't have the language. I didn't think, hey, I'm an alcoholic. I was just like, this is what's going to help me get by. And when I quit, I had all the withdrawals, the sleepless nights, the shakes, the headaches. So when I look back, I say alcoholic. I do know that the language around it is difficult because there are people who are diagnosed and have done programs and have sponsors. I didn't have any of that. I probably would have benefited from something like that. But hindsight's 2020, and my vision was blurred at best.
You sound like an alcoholic, but then again, that's up to you to determine. But that's beyond heavy drinking right there. So anyway, all right, what was it you were trying to? So when you think about addictions, right?
Mm-hmm.
An addiction is, we could describe it two ways. One is it is a unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. Sound right?
Bingo.
Okay. We could also say on a spiritual level that it is an attempt to use an external solution to an internal problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that tends to end poorly, right? Because happiness, joy, peace, all the things we really want are internal jobs. Outside things can contribute, healthy things can contribute to the cultivation of it, but they can't create it, right? It's an inside job.
Yeah.
So for you as an Enneagram 7, think of your drinking wasn't your problem, it was your solution.
Exactly.
Okay. So what were you trying to solve?
Yeah. So just to piggyback on that, a huge part of the book is this embodiment problem, which is my body was telling me a story. So all of this loneliness, all of this pain, all of these things that I didn't even have language for, I was using alcohol as a solution because it goes down easy and you feel the effects immediately.
Which is seven loves.
Loves. And like you can ride a buzz for a very long time. But where you have something like prayer, or any spiritual rhythm, fasting, discipline, almsgiving, it doesn't matter what it is, all of these things that require discipline and cultivation. And so a huge part of the book is that embodiment, where your body goes, so goes your soul. And my body was telling me that something was off. I just didn't have ears to hear or eyes to see. So some of my internal problems, I know I felt disconnected from the world. I had this idea that I didn't know myself enough, and I put this perceived person forward that people would love. And that perceived person received a lot of love, but the real Josh, underneath all the masks and the person hiding behind everything, had nothing. And so I felt alone. There's this time I remember seeing a picture of myself back then. It was like wraithly thin. I felt like a coyote. I used to live in Toronto, which is a big Canadian city, for those of you who don't know. And I just felt like I was carving through a city, like sharp and alone. And then I would go to seminary. I was doing my master's, or I'd go to church. And I would just turn on the show, get the love and adulation that I thought I needed in all the wrong ways. And then I would leave and I felt worse off than before. So some of it was lovelessness. Some of it was identity. Like I didn't really know who I was. I'm kind of the black sheep in my family in the sense of being a 7 and being an artist. Like I needed to go and do and see and experience. And there was a way of living that was very constrained. So some church context, my dad was a cop, he's a pastor now. And the context I grew up in was a sort of like hyper order. If you want to fit in the club, you do these things, you say these things, and life goes good. I couldn't do those things. I didn't want to say those things. I wanted to know why. And so I just kept feeling all of the boundaries, these kind of tyrannical hyper-ordered boundaries compressing on me. And so I had 2 survival mechanisms. One was drinking, take the edge off. The other one was you just be a hypocrite. The song and dance that everyone has to do. So I think the drinking, ultimately, to answer your question, sorry for ranting, the drinking was just to kind of plug the hole of feeling alone, feeling loveless, unloved. And I had this thought that if I kept going the way I was going, I was just going to walk off the edge of the earth. You can only fake for so long, and I'd leave a pub and just walk. And I thought to myself, one day someone's going to step on the loose thread and I'll just come unraveled and disappear.
Hey everyone, I just want to share some exciting news about my new book titled The Fix. My goal with The Fix is to share practical ways to apply the 12 steps to any self-damaging behavior or addiction. But this book is about more than finding recovery from our addictions. It's a deeper exploration into the big ache that fuels addictions and other self-destructive behaviors in the first place. Don't wait. The Fix is available to order right now, and you can even get a limited edition autographed copy at fixsignedbook.com. So I have a new book on the 12 steps, it's called The Fix. And it's just about my journey of recovery from alcohol and drugs and any mood altering substance. You put a mood altering substance in my body and it's off to the races. And I think they're very complicated. I think addictions are genetic. I think they're biological. I think that they're social. I think they're economic. I think they're, familial. I think they're trauma. I think they're dealing, but ultimately, because everyone is an addict at some level on the continuum, right? They're really a way of dealing with us. They're principally spiritual in nature.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, you described it so beautifully, is we experience a real, or it's actually a perceived disconnection, you use that word, from God, from self, and from others. And the pain and distress of simply being human in a riven world, right? I think addicts, alcoholics, whatever your fix of choice is, have an exquisite awareness of that disconnection, and it becomes intolerable. And so the only solution is I've got to anesthetize or numb this thing in order to continue functioning. And then the thing you use to numb or anesthetize it prevents you from functioning after a while.
Yes.
And now you have a bigger problem than the problem you were trying to solve to begin with.
The shadow grows. Yeah, everything you're describing. So my moment of depressive clarity was I just got married to my wife. We've been married for about a year. I'm drunk before work. I took a big pour of Jim Beam White Label, so nothing top shelf. And I'm getting ready to cycle. I'm getting ready to cycle into the office. And as I'm going, I feel like a different kind of sick in my stomach, like I'm repulsed by myself.
Yes.
And I can feel everything in me sloshing around. And I have this moment where I'm looking at the streetcars as they're passing by, like the trams, and I'm looking at the cars on the road, and I'm just hoping that there's a malfunction and a tire blows off a car and does the deed I can't commit. And so then I just have this moment where I think this is rock bottom. This is this moment where I want out, and I'm too much of a coward to do it. Thank God I'm too afraid to do that, because life is a gift. And then I hear this is how the book opens. I hear this thing, this longing inside of me that's but you could, instead of going out, you could go up. You've tried to fix it your way. If you're going to call it quits, why not try one last thing? If it kills you, so be it. But maybe it doesn't. And so I remember I parked my bike up behind the office, and I used to work at a bank as a project manager. So I've got my hair slicked back. I'm wearing the nice button down, the nice dress pants, the slick shoes. And in behind the office, there's all these homeless people, and their hair's tattered. They're drunk. They smell just like we smell the same. They are I'm the outside of the tomb that's all whitewashed, but the inside is dead man's. They are this mirror. I'm that's me. Except they at least have the courage to not fake it, right? I just had this moment where I'm looking at them. The same regret is on my shoulders, the same vomit smell on my breath. And I remember praying, just being Lord, I can't, if you're real, and I have my master's in theology at this point. I'm if everything I believe is true, I need it to be real in a way that actually rescues me from the pit and mediocrity and apathy and cynicism and addiction, or else I can't make it. And so, yeah.
So what's so interesting is Bill Wilson, who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, right? You should really read the first 164 pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, it was written in 1935, and you have to sort of tolerate that syntax and vocabulary choices and, and whatnot. I cannot believe to this day that it is not mandatory reading in every seminary and even in American literature courses in American universities. Because it's sometimes when Bill W. talks, he sounds like Paul.
Let's go.
It's actually strange. It's this guy is channeling.
Yeah.
And he would say that what you had was a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it expelled your need and desire for alcohol, right? And because what you were, and replaced it with God, an experience of God, which was who you were looking for all along anyway.
That's right.
Right. So for those of you who are listening and struggling with addictions, and that could be to porn, to sex, because actually the same thing is happening in your brain terms of dopamine and serotonin and everything else, right? The exact same thing is happening if you're a porn addict, a gambling addict, sports betting, porn, food, sex, love, a relationship, codependency, doom scrolling, whatever your thing is, right? You're trying to run from the fundamental, inescapable pain of being human. And trying to find a bypass for making life more tolerable apart from a relationship with God.
Yeah.
Okay. And that will end poorly. Dare I say, and Anthony knows I never use this word, it will end demonically. It's just the nature of this thing. So often sevens will tell me, who I meet in the rooms of recovery, right? And I meet my share of sevens, right? It's almost like they said, for just a moment, when I took a drink, it's as though all the voices in my head, just for a moment, that were going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and arguing with each other, and just all the swinging back and forth from thought to idea to fascination to this, right? Moving it just at a clip that I couldn't keep up with, suddenly just quieted down. And the sense of this sort of moment of exhalation where I could just sort of be at home in my own body and in my own skin, because I was like constantly jumping out of it. Was that your experience?
Yeah, like even getting to hear that, the immediate picture in my mind was, I remember I would go to, say, the local after work, and I would ask for 2 pours of a bourbon, and the first one I would just take back like a shot, and I'd have this deep sigh of like, oh, finally. I just like, and then I would nurse the second one, and I would have this of just, some of it is the voices, some of it is just like this need to move. And I still will feel it, and I'm more aware of it now, but my wife and I, we have coffee together every morning, and our kids, we give them little baby chinos, like steamed milk. And there's times about half an hour in, I start getting antsy, I start getting moving, I start thinking all these stuff, like for work and for painting and or drawing and writing and all the things I want to do. And she'll just like, take a breath, like, it's okay. Like, and we're learning for me to stay in a moment without. And so alcohol was that tool. It was definitely that tool that took the edge off.
So it sounds like you were just constantly out over your skis.
Yeah. So I spiritualized so much of this. So I was working full time at the bank. I was taking my master's in seminary. I was leading small group at church. I was discipling a few guys a week, and then it was my first year of marriage, so I wanted to do the cliche, take your wife on a date every week and spend all this time together. And so the fallout was I was just sleeping like 4 hours a night, and the only way I could fall asleep was to have another shot and put myself to sleep. And so I was way out over my skis. I was burning the candle at 4 ends, and I just was done. It just got to a point where I was done.
So for those who are listening, I want to move on to be very specific about the book. But for those who are listening and you're thinking about this topic of addiction, you're thinking, or about just compulsive self-sabotaging behaviors, right? And yours may be, what you're describing, Josh, is a severe addiction. But there are mild addictions on the spectrum, moderate addictions, and then severe. So the way that I understand addiction, and this is the magic of it. So here, I know that sounds crazy, but there's a little bit of magic in addiction. If you have that moment of awakening, or you're open to it, you realize that an addiction turns out to be an invitation to a depth of relationship with God that you did not previously know existed. And so if you can frame it, I'm not trying to reframe this as a positive, like addictions kill people. Okay. So I'm not like, you very easily could have died. Yes. But the fact of the matter is that by some inexplicable experience of grace, you consciously, unconsciously accepted an invitation from God to put down drinking and take up a relationship with Him that you did not know was previously available at that depth.
That's right. So Augustine says that it is easier to heal a person who has passions than a person who has killed them. So when I conceive of these people who have addictions, who have these passions towards sin, it is good that you haven't killed off this ability to love and desire and crave. You are right. Those loves and desires and cravings can kill you. But in his frame, the cutting off of the ability to do that is a longer, slower, painful death. And so all is gift and all is an invitation. That is a huge theme in the book. God, I thought that I was chasing after God, but it's like Henry Nouwen said, I had to learn that he was the one who was, so a theme in the book is the hidden music. What I heard that day was like this echo of a tune that I couldn't place. And I was like, this is the invitation. This is God's infinite hidden music that is, and I had to learn Christ was singing the song over me, like Zephaniah says. And so I think you're so right. Addictions are never good. But if you learn to listen to your body and then you orient some of that towards God, you can see how your body, your heart, soul, mind, and strength is yearning for a true relationship with the Godhead, the divine.
Yes. And then also having to learn that in this life, as Ronner says it so beautifully, right? In this life, we all die unfinished symphonies. So Anthony, you got a guitar right there?
Mm-hmm.
All right, pick it up and play me 1, 5, 4, like it's the end of a song. Let's see if we can get this through. Now, everything in us wants to hear him go to the 1. Go to the 1 now.
The release.
And then when we hear that 1, we all go, thank you. You went back to the tonic, right? You went back to 1. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the problem is in this life, it always ends on 4.
Yeah.
And we're all like in what's called suspension. Literally in music, we call it like a suspension, right? And lots of songs end on a 4, like because it gives it actually denies the listener resolution.
Yeah.
Right? Now, unfortunately, in this life, at least very, 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 very rarely, but in this life, we never hit 1 again. It's not until we are home and at full union with God that we'll hear that 1. And so yes, we discover this relationship with God, and yet there's not this full consummation.
Yeah.
And so we have to learn how to live in that tension.
Man, you're speaking my language. So Lewis has his idea of like sensa, longing for the longing.
Yes.
And I think for me, like that echo of a tune I've never heard, the scent of a flower, finding Christ, I smelt something. I was able to smell the echo or hear the echo and smell the lingering traces of a flower. And then the more I leaned in, it was that same feeling of, I'm not getting enough. I need more. And the temptation was, I know what to do when I need more. I can numb with something. I can take the edge off. The beautiful thing about Christianity and my walk with God and how I've conceived of it and how I think the early church fathers and the desert fathers all conceived of it is that longing always drives you deeper. And every time God gives you a little bit more grace, a different revelation of his beauty, of his goodness, of his truth, it just whets your appetite more. You think it's going to satisfy you, and it does for a moment. And you say, yeah, but I know there's more.
Yes. In fact, there's a great Christian mystic who actually the name he gives to God is the more. Oof. Capital M.
And, I got goosebumps a little right there.
That was cool.
So when you were describing, the word in German is Sehnsucht. That's the word that Lewis uses. And the way he describes it, because we have no equivalent in English for that word. God bless the Germans. They have a million words like that. But the way he defines it is this: an unquenchable, inexpressible longing for the unnameable.
Come on.
Right? Now, I'm wondering as I listen to you, by the way, if you're what's called a 1-to-1-7. And 1-to-1-7s are very drawn to mystic ideas.
Oh, that's me.
I'll give you an example of who I think may be one was Steve Jobs. Jobs would, I mean, he would travel around India and hang out at ashrams and drop acid, and he was looking for some kind of, this sort of mystical plane, to understanding things. And that, as you speak, the kinds of things you're interested in, the things that you're talking about, have the ring of that particular type of 7.
That's very interesting.
And yes, and in fact, when I'm talking to you, you are very much in your head. Like, you are interested in ideas. Like, and in fact, your response, and I guess it's also partly vernacular, but it's interesting. Like, whereas a 4 would be getting this all at the level of heart. Not all at the level, but very much more like a feeling. You're being stimulated by ideas. Like, you're buzzing on ideas.
My mind is, just so you know, my mind is racing right now. I'm thinking of like the conferences by John Cassian. I'm thinking about all the modes of the Desert Fathers and how they brought. So you're not wrong. Everything is like, ideas fascinate me.
So how do you translate ideas for you in the spiritual life? How do you translate interesting ideas that make you sound very smart at conferences, but how do you translate them into an actual experience of God that's transformational?
So that is a huge part of the book, because I had this thing where all like take 2 platitudes, call me in the morning didn't save me. And there's a chapter, and even the demons know, right? Like, you're not going to get saved by intellectual stimuli. And so one of the things that I needed to begin processing was to say, how do I take, it is the cliche, how do I take this down from my head into my heart? But I wanted to go deeper. I want to get from my head into my fingertips, into my feet, into every part of my body. And some of it was ideas. So I have these guides, they frame parts of the book. I'm thinking, processing these concepts, these ideologies. And as I'm going, God keeps bringing to mind Lewis, Chesterton, John of Damascus, St. Clement of Rome, all these people I studied in seminary and read. And they're not letting me think my own thoughts. They keep pushing me towards this embodied, if you do not live this out, you actually don't believe it fully.
Okay, so you've said embodied a number of times.
Yeah.
I've got to stop you for a second. What do you mean by embodiment? Because there's a lot of different ways to think about that.
Yeah, so that is I've realized since using that word, people are using it a ton nowadays. So what I mean is in the flesh, incarnate. A riff on obviously the greatest incarnation. So my conception of embodiment, so one of the curses I think of the modern church world, even the modern world, is a kind of functional Gnosticism. This idea that knowledge will save us, that definitions are enough, and that if you think the right stuff, you just look at our current concept, our current culture. Who are the heroes of our current culture? It's the scientists. Well, it used to be. I think we're moving towards a kind of new age paganism, but that's a separate conversation. So for me, I started asking myself the question, which would be, if God is beautiful, what does that do to me as a person? What does it mean when the church fathers say, I contemplated the beauty of God? And what did that do to them, heart, soul, mind, and strength? Like their body, their heart, their feelings. So embodiment to me is these virtues in the flesh, through the body, learning to experience the world with my body. The body reveals the soul, John Paul II. And so I thought to myself, my body is revealing itself to me. It's revealing these deep longings of my soul. And it's also the mode with which I interpret other people. Like, I'm glad I get to see you guys on video. I can see your body, the way you move your hands, the way you move your eyes, the way we move our bodies is revealing the things about us that matter. And going back, just to loop it all the way, going back and seeing that picture of myself from this time where my eyes looked hollow and I was like, my body was revealing just how emaciated my soul was. Does that make sense for embodiment? So it's just these things in the flesh, these ideas in the flesh.
Yes. Going back to the addiction and talking about embodiment. So one of the great tragedies I feel like in the spiritual life, and I think most people wrestle with it, is this horrible delusion that God is outside of their body. So when we talk about, and we're going to talk about this later today, Anthony, when we speak with John Eldridge today, right? So when you have a mystical experience. The subject-object distinction falls away. It's no longer I'm separate from God. The self and everything falls away, and all you experience is union.
Yep.
Okay. Now, most people of faith see God as outside of themselves and therefore separate from them. But that is not what Scripture teaches. Nor does it recommend in any way, shape, or form that you live that way. Right? Yeah. Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Yeah. And that's what he wants for us. The fact of the matter is that the kingdom of God is already within you.
Yeah.
Right? So you came into the world with God in you, a particle of God in you. And if we don't get that idea of embodiment, that idea of God in me, in my core body, in myself, then I think it leads to things like addictions because you feel separate from God, from self and others versus interconnected.
Yeah. And that's like the Eastern Orthodox conception of salvation anyways, which is theosis, partakers of the divine nature, so that we, just like Lewis says and Athanasius says, God became man that we might become God. And his conception is you partake of the divine nature in fullness, which is you become fully animated by the Holy Spirit who dwells within us. And so part of my process and my journey up out of rock bottom was I had a mystical experience. That's about halfway through the book. Very powerful. I won't talk about it now because I haven't cried much in my life. I've probably cried like less than a dozen times. If I talk about this, I'll cry. It was very powerful. It's also a good teaser. But I had this moment where dreaming while awake, and when it was done, I felt loved for the first time in maybe my life. I don't even know how to conceive of the love that I felt. And my wife was away. And when she came back, we went out for a sushi. And I had a chat about it with her, and we're bawling our eyes in the sushi place. And then 3 months later, I asked her, hey, have you noticed a difference? And you are not even remotely the same person. You are a substance of a shadow of who I wished and hoped you would one day become. And it's just like a true mystical experience where everything you said right there is just exactly how I felt. When all the lines give way, like when Paul says, now we see through like a glass dimly, then we'll see face to face. I just feel like God pulled away one extra shade of reality and let me see the capital T, capital R, true reality. And the kind of consummation I felt in my body, that's what changed me. I can't process that mystical experience, and I've never tried. My body felt something transform, and that's more than enough.
Yeah. Well, in fact, if you had a true mystical experience, you couldn't describe it. That's actually what I mean. If you go by Catholic teaching about infused contemplation or mystical experience, you would say, number one, it came to you unbidden and suddenly. It wasn't, you didn't see it coming. It just happened to you. Is that fair? Yep. Secondly, the distinction, as I said earlier, between subject and object, God and self falls apart, just falls down. And there's no sense of the ego. It's gone, right? Yeah. It's evaporated in the presence of God. And I could go on. I don't want to give a lecture on what a mystical experience is, but one of the conditions for determining whether something was a mystical experience or not is this idea that once you've had it, every attempt you make to try and explain it to somebody else is an exercise in frustration. You just simply, it is transcended language. So now that you're like, I don't know, I can't. It was like this. It was like that. I don't know. Forget it. I can't tell you what it was like, Yeah. It's hard to do. Well, hey, everybody, we're talking with our new friend, Josh Nadeau, author and Enneagram 7, by the way. We are talking about his new book, Room for Good Things to Run Wild, How Ordinary People Become Everyday Saints. Josh, we got to wrap up. What do you want people to know about this book that they don't know yet, based on our conversation, that would inspire them to perhaps go out and get it?
Yeah, the thing that I wrote the book I wish I had, is what went through my mind. So not needing to being a kind of quote unquote independent writer and an independent author and artist, allows me the freedom to talk about things the way that I feel like they should be talked about. And so part of what was really compelling to me about writing Room for Good Things to Run Wild was to take all the stuff that we've talked about so far, Ian, and frame it up through the language of beauty. And so I think that beauty will save the world, to quote Dostoevsky. And what I wanted to do is not write this intellectual treatise. There's a ton of ideas that inform it. I wanted to tell a story that captured people's hearts and minds. And I wanted to give not a how-to manual. I wanted to give them a why be. So I think the purpose of life is to become a saint. And what I want to do is make God so beautiful that you must have him. And I want to make the life of the saint, the ever onward and ever upward call of becoming a saint, the most attractive life possible. And the way to do it was, for me, was not to say, here's celebrity, here's fame, here's clout. It was to take the everyday, the ordinary, all is gift, everything is an invitation. So the single mom who's taking care of kids and stretched to her absolute limit, she's becoming a saint. She is making heaven known, with like the kingdom of God known within her kids' lives, in her community. The ordinary is holy. Everyday things are beautiful. And if you commit to the path, capital P, it will be the hardest thing you ever do, but it will be the best thing you ever do. I get so far, I just remember myself as a shadow, like a husk of a person walking through life feeling so empty. And then I look at the grace that God showed me, saying, Josh, here's the way, walk in it. And every step along the way made me a more real person, right? You say yes to God and you become truly human, more and more human. You say no and you reject divine life, and we slowly unmake ourselves. So my appeal to people to pick up this book is, if you feel like I did, your faith wasn't coming through for you, you felt mediocre, you felt like you're a hypocrite, you feel like you're on the outside of Christianity looking in, or even on the inside looking out, like, hey, maybe I don't want a part of this. Or if you want some like depth and substance to your walk with God, I tried to write a book that would give it to you in your body, not in your mind first, a book in your body, a book that would wake up the reality of all the things your body is trying to reveal to you. And if you just say yes, man, I can't oversell it. Like, God just never doesn't come through, even when things are hard. So I almost died 2 years ago. I had some horrible medical things go on. And praise God, a miracle. And even at what felt like I could hear the hempen cords of death's robe tattering in the wind, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, all is still a gift. And I couldn't have ever uttered those words with authenticity if God didn't take me on this decade-long journey of, hey, I want to be a saint. And I will say the last thing, and I'm sorry for ranting, it takes a long time. Get rich quick schemes, get spiritual quick schemes do not exist. This is a path, and every step along the way matters. God is, to quote Lewis, he knocks down our house of cards to build us up into something that, what does Hebrews say? Everything will be shaken until that which cannot be shaken remains. God intends to make you invincible, and we are the weakest kind of stuff that it takes a lot to make us invincible. But he'll do it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, my brother. Tute Gras. And it's Graham Greene, who's wonderful. The power and the glory came to my mind as you were speaking. All is grace. We thank you for being on the show. And everybody, go out and get yourself a copy of this book, because it sounds like a smoker. And Anthony?
Yes, sir.
Happy New Year.
Same to you, man.
Josh, thanks for being on the show, my friend.
Thank you, guys. It's truly an honor. This was so much fun.
And everybody listening, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. Until next time.